Hello, welcome back to our episode 3. So in previous episodes, we've touched base on the background of how COVID-19 led to the digitalization of education. We've discussed previously about issues arising and how people were affected and how things were going about in the universities and K through 12 systems. And now we're going to touch base on some positives and solutions of the digitalization of education. Once again, I'm Bobby Faith.
I'm Cameron.
I'm Monica.
And I'm Maddie. And like Bobby Faith said, we're going to dive into both some of the positives and also some of the solutions to helping with the digital gap. So like we've talked about, the digital gap obviously has created a lot of inequities in education. But as practitioners in higher ed and as students in higher ed, I think it's safe to assume that we're not necessarily going to move backwards. Like Monica mentioned in episode 1, like education's always going to look different now post 2020. And so we kind of have to deal with the repercussions of that. But one thing we also wanted to touch base on are some of the positives that have come from the digitalization of education. One of those being that Zoom classes have made education more accessible for some groups of people, right? Like if you're working full time, like a lot of us do here in the Zoom call, or if you're like a mother, any of those kind of like busy work life things, hopping on a Zoom at the end of the day for class is a lot of times more convenient than having to drive to a campus. And so that's one positive. Also, students with disabilities have really gained a lot more access to education with this. For example, if you're someone who maybe uses a wheelchair or has any other physical disabilities and navigating campus is really hard, being able to access your classes on a Zoom call is really beneficial.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's something that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. I think virtual courses, they really are a really viable option, I think, for students that have other commitments. You mentioned family life or even professional life as well.
Yeah, for myself, I'm from California, so I've been able to go home a few times a semester and take a class from there. I didn't miss anything. So it definitely has opened up, I guess, that accessibility, right? Like education, we have access to it not only in campus, but also, literally logging on, and we're still getting that similar education that we would if, we were back in a classroom.
No, I agree. Coming from a full day of teaching and just hopping on a Zoom at 6 p.m., it's so convenient, just instead of just driving to campus, making to that drive, from my house to campus, it's probably a good 20, 30 minutes, it's a lot faster. It's a lot, hopping on a Zoom call is a lot faster than making that drive. So it really is convenient.
Yeah. And so it's like, how do we both, take advantage of this, but then also help those students who are in the digital gap, right? And like don't have access. And so one of the things as practitioners and also any students who are listening to know are that there are higher education institutions that do prioritize providing their students with technology and with internet. For example, Lone Star College, which is a community college, they actually have 7 different campuses in Houston. March of 2020 signed a contract and they give internet to all their students. I'm not internet or technology savvy, so I don't know exactly what that process looks like, but they guarantee that internet access to their students. And so if you're in a place where you do need internet access or a laptop or any of those other materials, looking into universities and colleges or community colleges and finding the ones that do prioritize that for their students is definitely a big tool you can use. Also, there are tons of scholarships and grants out there. And I know a lot of times we're like, oh, just apply to scholarships and they're out there, but there are some specifically for technology. And so looking for those specific ones can also be a huge benefit.
And I love that you mentioned Lone Star College and how they provide internet for their students. And I think, for us as professionals, what we can do is we can advocate for that. We can be that change at our institutions. If you think about how right now, I think, students, we're all students at UTSA, and I think in our tuition, it's about $350 for library access, which that might sound like a lot at first, but when you consider how much at least we use the library as grad students, the databases, access to JSTOR, access to ERIC, things like that. So then you start to look at it, what would be another, $25 on top of that to provide internet access to students that might not be able to afford it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, I love that you brought back, like, as practitioners, like, what is our role in this? Because, like, obviously we're students right now, but hopefully we'll be working full-time in higher ed for the rest of our lives. And so finding out how we can help those students in need is super huge.
Yeah, growing up in this pandemic, right, has given us that insight look. Definitely made us more compassionate and empathetic to situations like this. And like you mentioned, Maddie, if we are in this for lifelong, like I hope, we're able to take what we've learned and sort of just make sure that, we are creating policies for our students that, benefit them and are helping them reach accessibility and, make their education more equitable.
I think with where we're at this point in higher education history, I think we have a really great opportunity to address inequities with the digital gap, but also innovate as well. Technology is a wonderful tool as we are essentially, I think at some point we're going to look back at this time period as almost like another industrial revolution. In most of, developed, quote unquote, developed countries, generally speaking, most professions now require some sort of computer skill. But what we don't want is we don't want that to be a barrier or a hidden cost for students pursuing their education.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I think that brings us, to the end. I know we've covered a lot in a short amount of time. But yeah, I know we want to thank you all for your time. We're still learning about what's happening. This is, we're just 2 years into a pandemic that has revolutionized the digital education. So I don't know if anyone has closing thoughts before we sign off for the night.
I think, it's like you said, Monica, we're at a point where we're 2 years into this pandemic, and, we're starting to see like this idea of hybrid education where some of your classes are in person, some are online, things like that. It was already trending that way. I think COVID accelerated it to a point where it perhaps might have been a little too quickly. Of course, we had no choice. I think it was a responsible thing. I want to make that clear. But I definitely think it's, like I said, we have an opportunity to both address inequalities and serve as a vehicle for equity, as well as innovate and kind of prepare our students for the future.
Yeah, so with that, we just want to thank y'all for joining us for the past 3 episodes. And we hope that this is giving you the information you need as a student, as a practitioner, wherever you find yourself listening, and that this can be a resource for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.